Hello, and welcome to this BioProcess International Ask the Expert webcast. I'm your host, Jordan Stillman, Project Coordinator for BioProcess International. Before we get started, just a couple of notes. This webcast is being recorded and will be available for replay in the multimedia section of our website. We've muted the audio lines, but we welcome you to type in your questions for our speaker in the question and answer window on your screen. Please enter your questions at any time. Your questions in the question and answer window will only be visible to myself and our speaker. So thank you again for joining us today. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Mark Parry from Intertek.
Hi there, everyone. So I'm going to be talking today about inhaled and nasal technologies for the delivery of biologics. So I'm from our Intertek. I'm from Intertek, our site specifically in the UK, just south of Cambridge, where we predominantly our nasal and inhaled development work is done. So why Intertek? Who are Intertek? So we've been working with inhaled and nasal product development for over 30 years, and we're the largest GMP facility in Europe for inhaled and nasal development support. So we've got a lot of experience across all sorts of product types, and definitely the shift towards biopharmaceuticals, proteins, antibodies, and the like has really dominated the industry over the last several years. So why are we talking about inhaled and nasal delivery? So one of the problems that's always been a challenge for biopharmaceuticals has been routes of delivery, with the traditional gastric route being essentially unachievable, and so infusions and injections have been the way of delivery. Now, in nasal and inhaled delivery does provide a systemic dosing option, and we'll touch on that as we go through. But probably the really attractive thing to look at it is for its targeted delivery. Now, biopharmaceuticals are generally quite complex products and with very large suites of methodology required for the control. So there used to be a compelling reason why you're going to bring the complications of inhaled and nasal delivery and all the device product interactions that come with it. But really, one of the most compelling reasons we see it explored is for its local action. If you've got a compound that's maybe an antiviral or an antibiotic, and you're looking to treat specific lung infections, then being able to achieve therapeutic dose levels of that compound in the lung is much easier to do by dosing it locally, which can result in you ultimately needing a lower dose. And then when you're dealing with very costly APIs, as most biologics tend to be, that can be advantageous for that purpose alone, as well as improving the overall efficacy. When you start targeting things delivery directly, you also introduce different PK profiles. The effect of a direct infusion or injection versus local delivery can have a very different effect. Peak concentrations and overall, as it's passed out of the body, can change its efficacy, can change its behavior, maybe for the better, maybe for the worse, but you can achieve some differences there. And that goes somewhat for side effects as well. In an ideal world, shifting to a local delivery of something for a local treatment with a lower dose often can tend to improve the overall side effect profile, because you're using less and you're maybe dealing with lower systemic concentrations. But you need to also be mindful that you may get local reactions in the nose and in the lungs that are specific to that form of delivery. So it's not always all one-way street, but generally you would probably expect an improvement from the lowering of dose. And there's also aspects of patient experience, where you're looking at the difference between an injection and a nasal spray, for example. The patient, if they're managing on a chronic treatment, taking a regular dose, a nasal spray is much more convenient and much more comfortable for them to take, or an inhaler. This can be more compelling where maybe actually more on the systemic dosing and management, where that provides an overall improvement in the patient experience that maybe pays off some slight efficiency losses when you're doing systemic delivery via one of these routes. But I'd say, certainly from our experience, most of the conversations we're having with these products and these biologics for inhaled and nasal is really about looking for a local action or a local delivery route. So if we talk about the nose, which for reasons I'll work through tends to dominate a lot of these conversations, there's three main areas in the nose that come up as targets. The first is the turbinate. So this is this large mucosal surface area. It's there to warm and hydrate the air that you're breathing in. And it's the first part in the nose. It's where most simple formulations deposit most of the drug. But it gives you a large surface area. It's an interesting target for just general systemic delivery. And obviously you've got a large mucosal area, which with the current interest in mucosal vaccination is a target for that as well. You have the olfactory region at the top of the nose. So this has been a real target for direct nose to brain delivery, a very active area of research, where it's difficult to get pharmaceuticals across the blood-to-brain barrier. This provides almost a backdoor into the brain, and it is a really active area of development. And the last is towards the rear of the nose. You've got a lot more lymphatic tissue. So again, if you're looking for both mucosal and systemic immune responses, this is another area of an area of target. And it's this developing interest in the nose has driven a lot of device and formulation development to allow you to improve how you're delivering to the nose to target these regions. A lot of historic nasal use has been very simple. It's been very topical. It's been about hay fever and just blocked noses from colds and flu. It's not really been about systemic absorption. In fact, it's generally undesirable for some of those APIs. But this drive for research into new delivery routes, which actually has been a lot of systemic treatments as well as local delivery in the way, but a lot of systemic delivery. And that's been proven for drugs like sumatriptan, for migraine naloxone, for opioid overdose, flu vaccination products, and a lot of research and development into delivery for things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, but also more generally as a systemic delivery route for treating depression, anxiety with things like hormones like testosterone. So this has helped drive the industry, helped drive the knowledge for improving our delivery options within the nose. So your typical device options in the nose, you're probably the one you'll be most familiar with if you've seen it or used the nasal spray is going to be a simple aqueous nasal spray. These are traditionally solutions or suspensions. And this is a very accessible technology for biopharmaceuticals because it's an aqueous solution or suspension. And that's generally an accessible form because you're looking at parenteral delivery. There are some challenges with these. You've got, obviously now you're relying on the device to dose, so there's some robust issues there. But if you're looking at things like nasal vaccination, this is certainly a useful route, or even for chronic management. Probably one of your challenges here is that it's harder to support the freeze-thaw cycle. Some of these devices won't really tolerate that, particularly the monodose devices can be challenged by freeze-thaw cycles. But reconstitution is an option, and if you're looking to explore early clinical work, this is a very, very accessible platform. But a lot of developments have been, there's a lot of interest in development being looking at dry powder delivery. And obviously this brings some stability advantages, which can be advantageous for biopharmaceuticals, because if you can, lyophilize or spray dry the product, this gives you another platform route, much more compelling shelf life options. And this is where there's also been a lot of work at optimizing where the device is delivering into the nose by tuning the formulation and device to target specific areas, to target maybe blood to brain delivery or lymphatic responses or good systemic dosing. There are other products. You can get nebulized nasal sprays. This isn't generally a great idea. There's little compelling to do this over the other routes, really, particularly for biologics. And PMDI nasal, so this is where it's solution or suspension in a HFA propellant, is not a great formulation base for most proteins and peptides and the like. But I mention it because it is a established technology. So if we flip the switch to the world of inhaled, there's three main product types here, three main device platforms that we can utilize. So PMDI exists in this space and is very common. It's a very good low cost, accessible technology, but again, not maybe compelling from from a biologics point of view. The other two are dry powders, which is typically a mix of drug and lactose, although there's a lot of development looking at alternatives to lactose, things like mannitol, which can be more a better option for biologics, and nebulizers. So again, very similar to the aqueous solution suspensions that we're using in the nose. And each of these has definitely pros and cons. So one of the biggest challenges about particle engineering. So if you can produce your product as a solution, you can get it into a nebulizer and you can get it into a patient generally, and you don't need to worry too much about engineering that product. Now, it may not be stable in solution, but freeze thaw for vials of solution is certainly more achievable, and also reconstitution. So lyophilized in vials, reconstituted for nebulizer dosing, works very well. So it's a common target if we're looking at inhaled delivery. Certainly for early clinical proof of concept work, the nebulizer is a great platform. And if you're dealing with some acute conditions, hospitalized patients, there may not be a reason to look much further than that. But if there is a reason, then it may be because there's real solid versus solution advantages for either its formulation, but also its delivery behavior and availability once it's delivered. You can look at dry powder, but then you do need to engineer the particles down to sort of sub 5 micron size. So you're looking at probably spray drying processes. That's a little more hurdle to get through, but can pay dividends in terms of sort of optimum target product profile characteristics. So beyond that, the world of excipients in inhaled is actually somewhat smaller than it is in the world of parenterals, which is a little bit odd. So depending on what you need, you may be breaking some new ground on the tox work, but it's generally manageable, and there's certainly a lot of fast evolving science in this space. Dose range, it tends not to be a defining issue. Certainly nebulizers, you can be dosing 10, 20, 50 mg of drug in some cases, although you may hit viscosity issues with proteins. Dry powder is certainly 5 or 10, 5 mg is achievable. PMDIs, little more than half a mg is normal. So that may be a limitation, but tends not to be the defining limitation for biologics. Patient usability, as I say, it's more compelling if you're dealing with chronic management. A dry powder is a lot less faff for cleaning and tidal breathing, taking it over several minutes than the nebulizer. But again, in the hospital setting, that kind of goes out of the window. But one thing to think about is on-vent use. It's been a topic we've had a lot of conversation about. If you're treating very ill patients in hospitals, on ventilators, realistically, the nebulizer is your only option for really practical on-vent delivery. And one last point just to be mindful of going into inhaled and actually nasal products is the analytical requirements. And that is, you're used to dealing, I guess, with your product in the vial. You can define and characterize the total amount of drug that's in the product and in the device. But these drug-device combinations bring in two steps. One is about emitting the dose, particularly in both inhaled and nasal. You won't get necessarily everything out that you dose into the capsule or into the device chamber. And what comes out, you're interested in the size distribution. So for the inhaled, only for 100 micrograms of drug that you put in, it may be only 50 or 60 that gets into the lung. And you need to understand this both from your product specification, but also to understand anything you're doing on the tox and clinical work as well. And these are accessible methods, these are well-established methods, and it can really build on science you've already got, utilizing simple assay methods with a chromatographic or simple spectrographic. And it's really about just methods for collecting the whole dose or doing aerodynamic particle size or laser diffraction sizing on the product to fill in those pieces of the puzzle. But these are going to be your main performance analytic tools and will become part of your core product specification for an inhaled or nasal product. So that was a brisk overview. I think there's time for a few questions now, and obviously if you want to reach out directly after the presentation, particularly if you're watching the recording, feel free to make contact directly.
All right, thanks, Mark. So we do have some questions coming in. So the first question I have for you is, does inhaled or nasal delivery provide the best option for systemic delivery?
Yeah, I think a lot of the research has really been looking at inhaled, as nasal, primarily because it's easier to access, it's achievable, it's desirable. And so a product like naloxone, where you want to be able to give it to an unconscious patient, you can't really do that with an inhaled product. But I think in terms of the capacity for immediate sudden dosing, certainly inhaled may have the edge, but it's a harder thing to formulate for. I mean, it's been done, and things like insulin have been tried a few times, and it does work, and you can do it. I think a lot of the focus is on nasal because it's maybe more accessible.
All right, thank you. Next question. How do you understand how the drug has dissolved in the lung?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of development at the moment, and there has been over the last several years of lung dissolution models. So this is where you're trying to simulate. Once you look at when that drug deposits in the lung, it's going to be a specific size of drug to then see how that dissolves in simulated lung conditions. So it's been a lot of the generics market has prompted this because it's potentially a route to alleviate some of the clinical activity requirements, but it's fast becoming a useful development tool to understand and optimize the delivery of particles, especially poorly soluble drugs or complex formulations of drugs in the lung.
All right, thank you. Next question. What are your views on delivery of anti-TB vaccine via DPI?
Yeah, well, apologies.
No worries.
So I think, just punch the mic, apologies. I think most of the work has been looking at vaccine delivery via the nose because it's more accessible. I think going for the vaccine via the inhaled route is more challenging, but I think if it's achievable, if you're looking at diseases which are primarily affecting the lung, like TB, I think it's certainly a target. I think, I don't know if, I apologize if the question is referring to a specific aspect of that. Perhaps it's something we can pick up afterwards.
Absolutely. All right, a couple more, I think. What about dosing with proteins, particularly small antibody fragments such as camelid VHH antibodies?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing the full gamut of proteins, antibodies, from very small, almost large small molecules all the way up to very large mAbs. I think there's definitely some limits, I think, in terms of upper limits of size distribution, because you may be able to deliver a massive mAb, but depending on where you're delivering it to, how effectively that's actually transmitted into the cells, I think is certainly a challenge. But smaller antibody fragments certainly should be achievable. There's actually a lot of our work at the moment is we're having a lot of conversations with people looking at mRNA and DNA fragments in particular, but certainly looking at larger antibody fragments should be within remit. We have looked at larger mAbs, although I guess probably more of the work is on the smaller end of the spectrum, I guess, from biologically speaking.
Fantastic. And I think we have time for one more question. So do you have any comments on the role of inhaled delivery for COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting challenge for the whole industry, for every part of the industry. I think it's certainly fueled a lot of conversations that we've had with customers and potential customers in that space. I think so. Inhaled and nasal delivery for vaccine is definitely become very active and hot topic. Looking at mucosal vaccination has been on the agenda and been in the scientific research community for a while, and it certainly really jump-started that exploration. I think in terms of inhaled delivery, there's been a lot of the work in the industry to move inhaled delivery beyond asthma and COPD, and actually a lot of work have been looking at antibiotic and antiviral treatments directly to the lung. So I think actually some of the needs that COVID-19 prompts do kind of dovetail with the way the industry is moving somewhat. So I think inhaled delivery of antivirals and antibiotics is going to become a bigger part of the industry going forward, and certainly would be a really powerful tool as part of the COVID-19 response. And some of that dovetails with some of the repurposing activities we've been discussing and getting involved in, where repurposing a drug, looking at inhaled delivery of a repurposed drug, which maybe has some antiviral properties. By targeting and delivering it inhaled, you maximize the potential efficacy of that without maybe dealing with some of the challenges of the high parenteral dosing that might have been needed.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark. And,
no problem at all.
Thank you. Fabulous. Thank you to our audience for joining us. So the recorded version of this webcast will be available for on-demand viewing on our website. And as a registered attendee, you will receive a follow-up email providing you with a direct link. We look forward to having you join us at our future BioProcess International Ask the Expert webcast. Look for those announcements in your inbox. Have a wonderful day and goodbye.